can be difficult sometimes to bite the entire apple off. So, looking to replace a very specific component of your structure with mass timber in a hybrid approach is a great way to start off.
In this episode, learn about how hybrid timber systems can speed the delivery of new residential projects. Join Senior Principal Paul Becker and Vice President Kristina Rogers, both structural engineers based in Portland, Maine, as they talk with Chris Williams about mass timber for simpler low-rise residential.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of our Mass Timber podcast series. I'm Paul Becker, joined by my co-host, Kristina Rogers. Hi, Kristina. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. We're excited today to welcome Chris Williams. Chris is going to speak to us a little bit about hybrid systems in mass timber. He's designed mass timber structural systems for a bunch of different projects: offices, residential buildings, high-rise facilities, higher ed, municipal. I mean, you name it, and he's done it. But the one thing about Chris is he's super passionate about reducing embodied carbon in the buildings that he designs, and has been a great advocate for increasing the use of mass timber in our projects. So welcome, Chris. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. Today's podcast is going to focus on hybrid systems, but really how they affect or work best in low-rise buildings, housing projects particularly. Chris has done a lot of work in that area, and we're really excited to hear what he has to share with us.
Great. So Chris, maybe to start us off, can you share a bit about your role at TT and how you found yourself working on a few of these mass timber low-rise housing projects?
Sure. So I'm one of the practice leaders here for the structures group in the Portland, Maine office. I've been here for 18 years doing a variety of structures. Over that whole time, I've worked on several different types of timber structures, and eventually, executed my first mass timber project as an office building, low-rise structure. And since then, I've had a lot of passion for the material and trying to implement it into more projects here in the state and beyond. So, excited to be here to share some of my experiences.
So, Chris, an emphasis seems to be on the housing shortage, and I know that you have looked at quite a few projects, and you've got a pretty significant one on your plate right now. But why do you, or how do you see mass timber as a good fit on this housing, low-rise housing projects?
I think it's a potential nice fit into projects that have already been utilizing timber as a primary material. So when we're talking about affordable housing here in the state of Maine, where I do a lot of my work, most of these are in that low-rise height occupancy, 4 or 5 stories or less. They're already using light frame timber, and so what we're talking about is supplementing maybe one of those systems for a mass timber component. Oftentimes that's the floor systems, maybe replacing light frame wood trusses with CLT panels, and we're seeing a potential market for this, and it's why we're interested in it, trying to bring more housing projects online quicker to solve our housing concerns.
So are you seeing that the introduction of mass timber, how does it shift from what you traditionally see, right? Like if you're normally seeing these 3 to 5 story buildings fully light frame and you're making a swap, where is the swap and what's the benefit of it?
So I think the swap initially started for us maybe 4 or 5 years ago into elevator and shaft construction. We saw an issue in the industry with wood masons sort of starting to age out of the labor industry and looking for some other options that could be done quickly. And so shaft walls were sort of an early entry point of bringing in another material that's solid and robust, but doesn't take as long to construct and can be done manufactured off-site, then brought to the site and erected very quickly. From then, I think we've started to explore the possibility of looking at mass timber in the floor systems as a way to create modular, repetitive construction practices that are easy to reproduce on site, while putting most of the labor and coordination into an offsite construction process. So that's where we're seeing hopefully more of the industry starting to head. So we're taking on more of the project as a mass timber system, while still using other things that are in the light frame industry already to our advantage.
And what I guess what's the reaction been, and what do you see the advantages to be in that type of a system?
Um, I'd say the reaction has been mostly positive with the concerns overall on cost. I think CLT is a fairly material heavy cost product. And so there's concerns amongst developers about managing those costs. But I think the reaction to it otherwise is very positive. It's a nice aesthetic material. It can be, it can be brought to site and erected very quickly with small crews, at a relatively fast pace. And so we're finding, I think, that for developers or owners that are starting to use it or get more comfort with it, they're finding they can harness those benefits. Same with contractors that are starting to build more with it.
So the project at Colby is type of student housing, but it's a nice example of kind of how these pieces came together. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how the hybrid system came about there and how it all came together.
Sure. Sure. So the Colby project, the Mayflower Hill dorm, was originally envisioned as an all mass timber building. We ended up, subbing out the CLT walls for light frame, primarily due to cost, but the owner also had some concerns about durability. It was just simpler for them to sort of have some common drywall types of partitions that they could finish off when they get damaged. But we ended up with that sort of hybrid system, and that worked really well with blending the sort of the capabilities of both systems, being able to use a wall panelizer to do all of the wall panels offsite and bring them to site and erect them into place, and then supplement that with a CLT floor system that could be exposed in a lot of conditions as the primary aesthetic, which was really one of the driving goals for the college and for the architects designing the building, was to expose as much of the timber as possible, creating a really unique aesthetic for the student experience. So it brought together, I think, all of those different, pieces into a very, large, low-rise housing project for the college that right now I think they're very pleased of. It is topped off, and it should be, ready for occupancy here within the next year.
So now that you're through a big hurdle of having it topped off, have the benefits of the speed of construction and other things that we anticipated, have they proved out? Are you finding that it has been quicker to erect and a savings that way?
I would say as we got out of the ground, it was a little sluggish to start. It was sort of the first project that this particular construction crew had worked on in mass timber. So it's a bit of a bespoke project. It's got some unique design elements. It's not necessarily a project that is ready for reproduction in, like affordable housing or things like that. So speed of construction, while important, wasn't necessarily a key driver of the project. It was really more about the aesthetic and the user experience, which was why the focus was there on timber. But certainly as we got through the first wing and we moved into some of the other wings, we saw things going up faster, and we saw the contractor really building a comfort level with it. And as a result, it's really gone a lot faster for the latter parts of the project. And the hope is that provides more, growth and expertise in our industry, so we can see it pan out on projects where schedule is so critical so often.
So if this was a light frame project, and I know you've done many kind of similar concepts in all light frame, what do you see as different in terms of upfront coordination, either connections, MEP, shop? Did that process look any different?
The process certainly should look different because it's a different type of material than light framed in the way it's sourced and produced and eventually erected and constructed on site. So the real primary difference is mass timber, any component with mass timber, glulam, CLT, whatever, is produced with a very high level of precision. So when it's fabricated, you're producing panels up to 16th inch or less in tolerance. You can locate very precisely openings for mechanical, plumbing, electrical, and as a result, because oftentimes in the final condition, this is an exposed material, so it's the finished product. We want it to look very nice. We need to do a lot of upfront coordination in routing all of the systems that interface with the CLT, and those are primarily the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. But we need to get all of that pre-located during the approvals process before the product is ever brought out to site. We don't want to be out there coring holes, sawing, doing things in the field that are manipulating the product, because it's not easy to do in the field. And so we really push hard to get general contractors to embrace the idea of early clash detection, to do it early and get involved and get all the contractors together during either in the design process or early in the construction process, so that we're getting that coordinated up front. Because if there are misses, they're harder to deal with than light frame that might have a little bit more play in the ability to manipulate it in the field.
Great. This one was also interesting in that we provided an additional service to the client, which was special inspection during the construction process. What was the benefit to the engineer also being the special inspector, and what did we learn from that process?
I think there's always a benefit to everybody involved to have the structural engineer who designed the building out on the site reviewing the construction process. They're the person that's most familiar with how the building functions structurally, and can see things, I think, that independent inspectors cannot see as well because they weren't involved in the design. And so to me, it's no different on a mass timber project, especially when you're talking about a new material that there may not be as much comfort level with installing. It benefits a lot to have the structural engineer out there checking as they go to make sure that everything's being done in accordance with the way it was designed.
So, Chris, with these low-rise residential buildings, especially if they're hybrid CLT and light wood frame, there's going to be a height limit that we're able to hit, given the light wood frame component of that building. But there are other ways to do the bearing walls, right? You could do them in all CLT, or you could do them in light gauge metal framing, which would give us the ability to go taller. And maybe you could help us understand some of the drivers there.
Sure. Yeah. So any light frame building is going to top out usually around 5 stories by the code. So in order to get taller, to get to kind of more the mid-rise level, you're going to have to introduce a different type of system. But you can certainly still utilize mass timber as the primary component. We've seen projects, particularly in Boston, go with cold form bearing walls, as you were discussing there, Paul, up to 7 or 8 stories in height. And you could even go a little bit further and use a steel frame and put the CLT panels on that, where the CLT panels are replacing your slabs on deck. So I think any of these hybrid systems are something that are great early entry points for owners to consider as they plan out their development. It can be difficult sometimes to bite the entire apple off. So, looking to replace a very specific component of your structure with mass timber in a hybrid approach is a great way to start off. And it can, you can look at those, carbon benefits as a result of removing those concrete slabs out and replacing them with something that's obviously a greener solution.
And then maybe kind of sticking in the realm of code a little bit. A lot of times when we talk about mass timber, we're talking about type 4 construction. But are there other types of building construction you're seeing pop up in this market?
So in my experience, type 4 lends itself best to tall wood. So when you're getting 8, 9, 10, 20 stories, you want to be thinking about type 4, because that's your best avenue to get those buildings codified, and across the finish line in that regards. When you're in the low rise, or maybe even the lower end of the mid rise, I really would encourage designers to think about type 3 and type 5, which are the current code provisions to allow you to use combustible construction. I think there's a lot of avenues there that should be pursued before you even look into type 4. And the reason is that they're a little more lenient on fire restrictive requirements. So your type 4s are going to require 2 hours on all of your frames, which is a lot of extra sacrificial wood that you need to put into the building, and that's going to drive cost up. So if you get your building codified in a type 3 or a type 5 approach without a lot of extra hurdles to get through that, you're going to typically end up with a relatively more cost-effective building.
So, Chris, it seems like low-rise housing is a great place for owners to dip their toes, if you will, in the mass timber. A lot of advantages. What do you see as the future of mass timber in housing, and what are you most excited about?
That's a great question. So I'd say I'm most excited about the opportunity to produce housing in a way that combats some of the current challenges we have around labor costs of construction, and issues we have on getting housing projects out to market at a faster rate. So I think our aging construction labor industry in the state, as well as others, is a real issue, and we need to find ways to move more labor off-site. And CLT and mass timber gives us a way to do that. So whether you're talking about affordable markets that really need to hone into that speed of construction and bringing those projects to market faster, or if you're at a market rate and you're talking about improving aesthetics, maybe trying to improve lease velocity and gain an edge in the marketplace, I think mass timber offers some incredible opportunities for that. And we've seen that in some of the work that our office has been doing lately. We've got an all mass timber building with a hybrid construction and a really nice aesthetic that the owner is very excited about. Our project, the Goldfinch project that we have in Iowa, is the first zero carbon, low income housing project certified. So we're really excited about that. So I think we're gaining a lot of momentum, and I'm just really excited to see how this material can really benefit, all of these markets that we've been talking about.
Great. Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for the work you've been doing in this market. It's been really interesting to learn from your expertise as you're applying mass timber to these types of buildings. Just kind of really seeing the knowledge and the things that are required from all facets. Architectural, mechanical coordination really helps bring the buildings to life, and it's been a great asset to see that applied in the mass timber market.
Great, and thank you so much for having me. Always excited to talk more about this, and we're very much looking forward to all these opportunities that are upcoming to be able to grow this mass timber industry.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to everyone for enjoying another episode of our Mass Timber podcast, and join us next time as we look at other topics and speak to other interesting folks. Take care.
Tune in for our next episode, Collaboration and Proprietary Systems at Under Armour's headquarters. And like, subscribe, follow, or comment.